All right, so today we're jumping into a massive question about where global power is headed. The argument we're breaking down presents these two totally different, almost opposite views of the West right now.
On the one hand, you have the West at what looks like the absolute peak of its power. It basically owns the entire global financial system, right? It's got the big currencies, the major capital markets, and a military that can reach literally anywhere on the planet. It's the picture of, complete dominance. But then you have this other picture, a picture of a civilization that seems, exhausted. It's grappling with all these internal problems, slow growth, populations that aren't growing, social friction, and maybe even a loss of the will to lead.
So what's the deal? Which of these is the reality? Are we talking about an unstoppable force or a civilization that's actually in decline?
Well, here's the thing. The fascinating argument we're diving into today says they're both true. It's not about some big, dramatic collapse like in a movie. No, it's something way more subtle. It's this slow, steady, but really fundamental shift in the balance of power. And that's the key idea here, relative decline.
Okay, let's unpack that for a second. The point isn't that the West is weak. Of course not. It's incredibly powerful right now. But its slice of the global power pie is getting smaller and smaller compared to other rising players. And here's the kicker. That victory in the Cold War, the moment that looked like peak triumph, the argument is that's when the exhaustion really started to kick in.
And look, this isn't just some vague idea or a gut feeling. The source material for this explainer actually lays out the evidence, in black and white. It charts this shift using 4 key ways to measure power.
Okay, first let's talk territory. Get this, at its peak back in 1920, the West literally controlled nearly half of the entire planet. Half. Now jump forward to just the 1990s, and that number was already cut in half again. That's just a huge, undeniable retreat from the world map.
Then there's population. It's the same story. Back in 1900, about a third of all people on Earth were considered Western. The projection for 2025, it's going to be more like 1 in 10. I mean, demographically, that's a massive shift. The West is becoming a much smaller piece of the human puzzle.
All right, let's talk money and manufacturing. Same trend. In 1928, and this number is wild, the West was making over 84% of all manufactured goods in the entire world. It was literally the world's factory. But that number has been on a steady decline ever since, because, other parts of the world started to build their own industries.
And this is where it gets really interesting. The trend even holds for military manpower. Now, don't get me wrong, the West still has a massive technological advantage. But when you look at the sheer number of boots on the ground, the West's share has just tanked. It went from nearly half of the world's military personnel in 1920 down to a projection of less than 10%. A huge drop.
So, okay, let's take a step back. You've got less territory, a smaller slice of the population, a shrinking manufacturing base, and fewer soldiers. When you put all that together, it begs a really important question. What happens when all that hard power starts to fade? Well, the argument is that soft power, we're talking culture, ideas, influence, it starts to follow suit.
And this leads to this really cool concept the source calls indigenization. It sounds complicated, but the idea is actually super simple. As Western influence pulls back, local cultures are roaring back to life. People all over the world are digging back into their own histories, their own languages, their own traditions, and they're doing it with a ton of new confidence. It's like a global return to roots.
You can actually see this play out over a couple of generations. So you have the first generation after colonialism, right? A lot of them were educated in the West, they went to Oxford or the Sorbonne, they kind of absorbed those Western values. But what about the next generation, the much larger second generation? They're educated at home, in their own universities, in their own languages. And this new generation, they're much more connected to their local culture. And let's be honest, they often resent the West's continued dominance.
And this quote right here, it just perfectly sums up the whole mood. We will be modern, but we won't be you. It's basically a declaration of cultural independence. It's saying, look, we'll take your technology, we'll take your science, we'll be modern, but we are absolutely not going to become a carbon copy of you to do it.
Okay, so this builds to something else. And honestly, this might be the most powerful and definitely the most unexpected part of this whole cultural shift, the massive global comeback of religion. For decades, the standard thinking was pretty simple. The more modern a society gets, the less religious it becomes, right? Science, secularism, they were supposed to make religion a thing of the past. But what's actually happened? The complete opposite. We're in the middle of what one famous thinker called la revanche de Dieu, the revenge of God.
So why is this happening? Well,
Think about what modernization actually feels like. It can be jarring. It pulls people out of their traditional communities, away from everything they know, and drops them into these huge, impersonal cities. When you're feeling lost like that, you look for something to hold on to, an anchor. And for millions, religion provides that. It gives you an identity, a community, and a clear set of values. It helps you answer those huge questions. Who am I, and where do I belong?
Okay, so let's put the pieces together. You have the West's hard power slowly fading. At the same time, you have this explosion of local cultures and a global return to religion. When you mix all that together, what do you get? You get a world that is being fundamentally rewired right before our eyes. We're leaving the unipolar, Western-dominated era behind and heading into, well, something completely new.
To really get a sense of how much has changed, let's just rewind to 1919. Picture this. 3 guys, 3 Western leaders are sitting in a room in Paris, and with just some pens and a map, they are literally carving up the world, creating new countries, erasing old empires, deciding the fate of hundreds of millions of people. I mean, that's what peak Western power looked like.
That world, it's gone. It's never coming back. Could you even imagine that happening today? A few Western leaders just deciding the fate of the globe? No way. The future isn't going to be run by one civilization. It's going to be shaped by this messy, complicated dance between maybe 7 or 8 major civilizations, all with a seat at the table.
And this all leads to one last kind of mind-blowing thought. What if the last couple hundred years, this whole era of Western dominance, wasn't the normal state of history? What if it was just a blip, a temporary anomaly? If that's the case, then what we're seeing isn't just a decline, it's a return to how the world usually is, a world with many different centers of power. And that, of course, leaves us with the biggest question of all. As this 200-year Western blip on the radar screen fades, what in the world comes next?